Welcome to a new video. Let's take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. The first story is called The Most Expensive Phone Calls. Many years ago, I worked as a programmer for an oil and gas automation company. This means we would design and build the computer systems for oil and gas plants, commission them, and support the operators during the day-to-day operations. Because of this, my company ran a full-time support phone. Every week a member of my team would get the phone and be expected to be available to answer calls at any time. We had enough people on the team that it would roughly equate to getting the phone twice a year. Most of the employees of this company were salaried, and the phone was written into their contract. For every phone call they took, they could charge a minimum of 1 hour in bank time. This was a good deal for them and made the phone easier to handle. I was a little different than my co-workers in that I wasn't a salaried employee. I was an hourly contractor. My co-workers would bank their time, but I was just paid out bi-weekly. My contract also stated that if I was being paid by the company, I had to be available exclusively to the company. This was added by their human resource department because a few years before they caught an hourly contractor running side jobs for other businesses at his desk. This also meant that if they wanted me to be available exclusively to the company, they had to pay for my time. For 2 years I knew the phone existed but had never had to take it because according to my contract, if they wanted me to be available, they had to pay my hourly rate after normal work hours to ensure that I was available to answer the phone when it rang. Then, as in most corporate stories, my completely awesome manager left for greener pastures and was replaced with an absolute tool. After a month of being in the office, he decided it wasn't fair that everyone took turns on the phone except for me. He declared that I would be put in the rotation effective immediately. I didn't want to cost the company a ton of money, so I tried to explain that if I'm on the phone that means they have to pay me 24 hours a day for 7 days. He scoffed and told me I obviously didn't understand how the business worked. I told him he didn't understand how my contract was laid out and that I'm an hourly contractor, not a salaried employee. He insisted that to be a team player I had better take the phone or look elsewhere for employment. I didn't want to seem like I wasn't a team player, so I accepted the phone and started my clock. 7 days later, I handed the phone off to the next guy and submitted my bi-weekly invoice. It came out to just over $10,000, with $8,400 being just that 1 week of having the phone. I waited about 15 minutes before I was pulled into the manager's office. When I arrived, the manager, the head of human resources, and the manager's boss, the head of the department, were there with my most recent invoice sitting on the desk. The department head just looked at me and asked what the hell I was thinking when I gave them that invoice. I explained that the new manager insisted I take the phone, even though my contract clearly stipulates that if the company wants me available the whole day, they have to pay for every minute I have the phone. The new manager became redder with every word. When I was finished, the department manager turned to him and asked him why he didn't know this, since it's common knowledge that no contractors are ever put in that kind of position. As he was stuttering for an answer, the department head dismissed me and told me to expect my check at the usual time. The best part? During the entire week, I had the phone, it only rang twice. Both during work hours and both calls asking for a specific person in the department. All I had to do was give them a phone number. Those 2 3-minute phone calls cost that company $4,200 each. After that, the new manager pretended I didn't exist and refused to talk to me for 3 months until he was moved to sales in a different department. I was at the company for another 2 years and never saw that phone again. The next story is called, You Are Annoyed I Changed the Rules? I lived at my grandma's house with my grandma, my dad, his girlfriend and his girlfriend's daughter Ashley. My relationship with my dad has been awful over the past few years. I came to the realization lately that he's very self-centered and not interested in apologizing for the countless things he's done to me. But nonetheless, I've still tried to include him in my life and play games with him, talk with him, and celebrate his victories even though he doesn't care about mine. We basically talk twice a month, even though we live in the same house. So when arguments started becoming stupider and stupider, and he intentionally tried to start arguments with me, I felt less inclined to spend any time with him at all. These events were the final straw for me. The 2 arguments that really ended it for me were the ones I had with him about board games. Now, first of all, I don't want to discredit having board game arguments as childish or stupid. I know most people have gotten in a silly argument over a board game. But this one didn't even take place during the game and had nothing to do with who won or lost. In this case, my dad became genuinely upset because I wanted to change the rules for 1 round. I asked, with all the clarification I'm about to give, if we could change the rules for the next round so you couldn't play a wild card last. That's it. Sure, the person who had won the last round had used that strategy, but I specifically said I had used the same strategy before, and it was a perfectly valid strategy, but that I just felt like playing something a little more exciting. Instead of understanding that nothing I had said was personal, my dad thought that by asking to change the rules I was trying to upset Ashley, the person who won the first game, and began defending her like it was his duty as a knight of the round table. I clearly stated it had nothing to do with her, and that I just wanted the next game to be different, but that didn't matter. My dad yelled at me for being rude and unreasonable for 5 minutes before changing the rules. After that, we only played one more game, and I thought we all had fun, but apparently, I was wrong. After the game ended, I asked Ashley twice if I had hurt her feelings or bothered her in any way. She said no, that she actually had fun, and very clearly stated that my dad had been acting crazy. So clearly my dad hadn't asked her if her feelings were actually hurt but assumed. Knowing this information, I had nothing else to say to my dad. I thought he had just overreacted and we were over it. But when I invited him to play another game the next week, he quickly made it known that it wasn't over. The next week I asked him if he wanted to play a board game and he said sure, on the condition that it ended before the lunch rush because he needed to work. I thought that was fair enough, and since it was about 10:45, I picked a game that would take maybe 90 minutes and decided to make some rule adjustments to make it shorter for him. The game was supposed to end when one of 3 large piles of jewels emptied, but I halved the number of jewels in each pile, essentially halving the playtime. So, me, my grandmother, Ashley, and he sat down to play a board game 15 minutes later. Before we start, I begin to explain the game to my dad and grandma. Ashley had already played the game. But before I can finish explaining to them, my dad blows up at me and tells me I better apologize to Ashley for what happened last week, that he didn't have any fun because I was mean and rude to her. He just started berating me for like 2 or 3 minutes as I just stared at him in awe. As silly and stupid as it was, I genuinely looked at him a different way at that point. I couldn't believe he was insulting me over something so small. But I wasn't going to apologize to Ashley, as much as he wanted me to. So I told him that if he wanted to admit that this argument wasn't about Ashley, I would do it. However, he refused to admit that he was the one who was acting, even after I asked Ashley if I upset her and she said no right there to his face. Instead, he just insulted me for being unwilling to apologize and a know-it-all, and wouldn't stop until my grandma finally told him to. So at this point, I was livid. But we start playing the board game, even though my dad is complaining the whole time. He's blocking half the board with the rulebook as he whines he can't find this rule or that rule. He complains about me going first, even though I was showing him how to play. He complains that I didn't explain the rules well enough and that nothing makes sense to him. And he doesn't stop berating me as we play. So I felt awful. However, I felt a little joy when he pointed out my rule change. Like last week, he got really upset about the fact that I had changed the rule for literally no reason. But I didn't complain to him. I didn't try to explain to him that I was saving him time. Instead, I just changed the rule back and continued playing the game. And the game lasted twice as long, to his own dismay, and he had to spend twice as much time than he wanted to with me, to his own dismay, and he was an hour late to work, to his own dismay. So I'm very sorry about changing the rules, Dad. I won't ever invite you to play a game again. The last story is called Store Manager Stupidity. A couple of days ago, there was a dog locked in a car in the parking lot. It was about not warm outside, but a dog locked in a car is still an alarming sight, especially during summer. A customer brought this to our attention, and in her anger concern, told us if we didn't do something to rescue this dog, she would smash the window and take the dog herself. My coworker tells her obviously not to do that and instead decides to call the license plate of the car out for the owner of the car to come to the front. This lady comes up, and the first words out of her mouth are, "Did someone complain about the dog?" As my coworker explains the situation, the initial complainer and the dog owner recognize who each other are. The two immediately start loudly going at each other, right in the front entrance, so any customers coming in or leaving get caught in the crossfires. This wasn't great for our business, and our store manager was upset that my coworker's intervention led to such a massive public spat in our store. A couple of days later, something similar happened. Our retail sales manager was coming back from her lunch break and saw a dog owner tying the leash of her dog to the bike rack. She left lots of slack available for the dog to sit, lay, and walk in a decent-sized circle. It was also not warm on this day. The dog owner then entered to shop for a bit. Shortly after this, an angry woman enters and demands the manager. The retail sales manager comes up, and the woman says this dog has been out there for hours, and that she walked her own dog this way earlier, and saw this poor miserable dog out there. The manager mentioned that she saw, firsthand, that the dog had only been out there for about 5 minutes, which poked a big hole in this woman's story. The angry woman decides to escalate, and says if we do nothing, she'll take matters into her own hands. The manager tells her she will handle it from there, and thanks to the woman for bringing this issue to her attention. The manager comes up with the idea to page the owner of the dog tied to the bike post up to the front of the store. She was briefed on the parking lot issue days ago, though, and decides to run her idea by the store manager. He says to her, "We can't get involved again. Last time, we caused a lot of frustration and trouble for our customers. We can't call the owner over because it will happen again." The manager tried to tell him the lady's threat and that she was worried this lady was going to take the dog or something. The store manager didn't care, told her that if she just complies, we'll have less trouble in the long run. And so, the sales manager decided not to page the dog owner, and just told the angry woman there's nothing we can do. The dog owner eventually comes to the front to cash out. Grand total of dog outside alone time was maybe 10 to 15 minutes, and she's only outside for a moment before she comes back inside in a panic. Turns out the sales manager's hunch was right. This angry woman wasn't happy with the lack of action and promptly stole the dog. Now we have a sobbing woman in the front of the store, crying loudly that someone has stolen her dog, and generally souring the store and kind of freaking out the other customers. We live in a dog lover's neighborhood. This was a huge deal to a lot of customers around her. We reviewed the security footage, got the angry woman's face, and took the dog owner's phone number to call if we ever saw her again. It was the most we could do, along with referring her to the police for theft. The next morning, we got a call from the dog thief herself, who told us she had taken the dog to a shelter and was shocked to see the baby was chipped, up to date on all their medicines, and was overall a very happy, healthy dog. The owner was called from the shelter and they were reunited. Our store manager was given so much grief over the two incidents that he's completely rewritten our dog policy. They are now welcome in the store, and we will always page for the owner if a dog is left unattended outside. Moral of the story: don't think that just because something went wrong once, that it'll go wrong every time, especially when variables are unpredictable. We in the store all agreed that a small public spat between two uppity humans was way better than all the stress we inadvertently put that poor dog and owner under. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel for more content. Let me know what you think about the stories in the comment section below. Have a great day. Bye bye.